Hello and welcome to this Community Writing Center workshop. The Community Writing Center provides individual writing consultations and writing workshops for all writers in the Great Lakes Bay region, free of charge. To learn more about our services, including virtual and face-to-face feedback on your writing, upcoming writing workshops, and our various writing contests and events, please visit our website at communitywritingcenter.com. This online workshop series is sponsored by funding by the Bay Area Community Foundation and the SVSU Center for Community Writing. Hi, I'm Kelly Fitzpatrick, a Michigan-based author and educator, and it's my pleasure to present to you the third and final session in our fiction writing series, which will focus on the skill of point of view. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Welcome to our workshop on point of view. The purpose of this workshop is to learn how different points of view can be used in fiction to create memorable narrative. This workshop is appropriate for beginning and experienced writers alike. It will last approximately 90 minutes, and you'll need a notebook and a writing utensil. You can also have the draft of a current work in progress handy if you would like to work on it during this workshop, but it's optional. All of our workshops aim to create an inclusive, respectful, and productive environment for all writers. We aim to provide feedback, strategies, and resources writers need to improve their writing, as well as to encourage collaboration between writers through active conversation and participation. Here's a brief preview of what you can expect during this workshop. We'll open with a quick write and discussion, followed by a craft talk on different types of point of view, as well as ways to express them and their purposes in stories. We'll look at some mentor texts with some opportunity for guided practice, as well as an extended writing time prompt. We'll finish with analysis and sharing, and we'll look at some takeaways for applying to your own writing. All right, let's start with our opening quick write to get our creative juices flowing. So here's the scenario for the quick write. It is Mia's 4th birthday party. Mia's mother, Tricia, watches as Mia's grandmother, Beth, walks through the door with a huge chocolate cake and sets it on the low coffee table while she takes off her coat. Mia and the dog both eye the cake. Now the prompt is to write the thoughts of one of these characters in this moment. So you might choose Tricia or Mia or Beth, or if you want to be really creative, you could choose the dog. We're going to spend about 5 minutes doing this, so really try to get into that character's perspective. We've got about 30 seconds remaining in our quick write. All right, hopefully you were able to have fun writing out that scenario. Now I'm going to have you go back and look at your response to just analyze some of the things that you're naturally doing. But first, I'm going to give you a preview of the instructions, and then we're going to look at an example response together, and then I'll give you time to go back and look at your own piece. So the directions are, go back over your writing and look for the following. What did your character focus on? In other words, where was their attention centered in this scene? What people, objects, concerns, emotions, or potential outcomes consumed their mind in this moment? Underline and label them. What is unique about the voice and tone that came through in your character's perspective? Underline and label evidence of that as well. And then finally, what do their focus and voice reveal about the character, the setting, or the conflict? So three separate things here that we're going to look at. So before you do that on your own piece, let's look at an example response together. So for this one, the author chose to write about Trisha from her perspective. So that's the mom. Trisha stared at the dark hunk of sugar less than 5 feet from the two forces of nature in the room. How could Beth think chocolate was a good choice in Trisha's house of white carpets? How could she place it at kid level and just walk away like it wasn't a black hole of temptation? With the couch in the way, she couldn't head them off. Was she a bad parent if she used a pillow as a projectile? Would the distraction buy her time to scoop up the cake? Where the heck was Henry? Of course not where she needed him. Pillow it would have to be then. Sorry about this, birthday girl, Trisha said as the cushion sailed toward the lunging 4-year-old. Okay, so now if we take a look at this response and we look for those elements of where's the character focus, what sort of voice do we hear coming through, we see something that looks like this. Trisha's focus here is definitely on saving the carpet, whereas we get some of her sarcastic voice coming through here when she says things like black hole of temptation. And of course, Henry is not there. So we get some of her personality coming out there. In this example, Trisha's focus is on saving the carpet from a mess if the child or dog reaches the unattended cake. This reveals something about the setting, that it started out clean, and also about Trisha's character, that her motivation is to keep her house clean or perhaps to maintain order in front of a guest. We also see that Trisha's tone is one of sarcastic humor, which comes through in phrases like black hole of temptation. Her sarcasm over Henry's absence and Beth's choices reveal potential conflict in those relationships. So we have character, conflict, and setting going on here in these examples of point of view. So now I'd like you to do the same thing with your piece of writing. Go back through and ask these questions. It's okay if these elements are not there. Just sort of see what you can come up with as far as what were they focusing on and are there any indications of a unique voice. We're going to spend just a couple of minutes doing this. All right, now that we have some insights on our own writing, let's do a craft talk on point of view. Point of view or perspective, it's called both things and they're fairly interchangeable, in a story refers to who is telling the story or whose eyes we are looking through as we experience the story. Now, this is different from the narrator. The narrator is the person who is narrating the story. That's also different from the speaker and the author. But point of view refers to kind of think of like if a book was a movie. Point of view is where is the camera facing? So like whose eyes, whose angle, whose experience are we looking through at the story itself? There are no right or wrong perspectives. Each one has strengths, though some are more common than others. They each also have their own limitations. So the three main points of view are first person, second person, and third person. And there are subtypes of third person that we'll get into here. So first person perspective is where the narrator is detailing events that happen to them as a character in the story. This is the point of view that uses I pronouns to narrate. So an example of this is from The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Sometimes as I am falling asleep in a dark, quiet room, I have for a moment a great and treasurable illusion of the past. So this is a first-person narrator. His name is I, and he is telling the story to the reader. You could use this point of view when you want to highlight the voice, personality, and or transformation of the narrator character. So it really allows that voice to come through strongly, and so that's going to be a strength of this point of view. Second person perspective is where the narrator is speaking directly to the audience. It's rarely seen, and this point of view uses you to narrate, so those are the pronouns. Here's an example from the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. You're an Orangene who's been living in the little-nothing town of Tiramo for 10 years. Only 3 people here know what you are, and 2 of them you gave birth to. So notice those second-person pronouns that are being used to refer directly to the reader as if they are a character in the story. You want to use this point of view when you want the reader to experience the events of the story as if they are living them. So it really allows them to step into that world. However, this point of view is very difficult to pull off well, though it can be done. Third person perspective is where the narrator is detailing events that happen to a character that isn't them or the reader. This point of view uses he, she, or they pronouns to narrate. Here's an example from Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. Dorothy Vaughan entered the Greyhound bus in one America and disembarked in another, no less anxious, hopeful, and excited than if she were an immigrant arriving from foreign shores. So notice here the third person pronouns. We have Dorothy Vaughan being referred to by name rather than as an I pronoun. And then we also have the she pronoun being used here. There are several types of third person point of view, so it can be broken down further. This perspective is quite common in fiction. The first type is third person objective, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when the narrator is neutral and comments on events as they occur without putting their own thoughts or emotions behind them. We also do not get a window into the characters' thoughts and emotions here. It's almost like a screenplay where it's literally just the actions and what is happening. So a really great example of this is by Ernest Hemingway in his short story, Hills Like White Elephants. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside of the building. We literally just have a descriptor and a location. There's no interpretation or emotion going on here. Use this point of view when you want to put the focus on the plot or the event that's happening and force the reader to read between the lines for the significance. So this is something that Hemingway is very famous for. He kind of strips all of that subjectivity out of the narrative and forces the reader to do that work of reading between the lines, because there is quite a bit of emotion in this scene, the American and the girl are talking about something very important, but it's not on the surface and it's not in the perspective. You have to read between the lines for the inference. Third person omniscient is when the narrator is all-knowing and all-seeing, so they can comment on events as well as the character's emotions and thoughts. These narrators can head jump, so to speak, between characters within the same scene, and that last part's going to be important here when we look at the next type. But omniscient means they can jump from one person to the next person in the same scene, even in the same paragraph if they wanted to. Here's an example from Dune by Frank Herbert. He heard the confirmation in her voice, said, "It's truth." She stared at him. He senses truth. How could he be the one? So here we have back-to-back thoughts from different characters within the same scene, which is a classic example of omniscience. Use this point of view when you want to showcase multiple characters' thoughts within the same scene, or to use dramatic irony to allow the audience to know things that the characters do not. Omniscient perspective was used quite a lot in classic literature, not so much in contemporary literature, but it is still done and can be used well in different scenarios. Third person limited is perhaps the most common, along with first person is used quite a bit in modern literature as well. But third person limited, it follows one character's perspective at a time per scene. So this means that you might have one narrator or one perspective character through the whole story, or it could change, but there has to be a scene change or a chapter change in order for us to head jump in third person limited. You can switch characters between scenes or keep the same one. There's also like a scale of how close the narrator is. So you might hear someone say that's a very close limited third perspective. And that means that we are right up close to the character's thoughts. We're inside their head. We hear everything, we feel everything, we see everything, versus maybe a more distant third limited, which might feel more like we're following that person around and we only see what they see, but we're not quite so inside their head. Here's an example from The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Dalinar closed his eyes, breathing in and out, slowly, calmingly, as they prepared themselves behind the siege bridge. Forget Sadeas, forget the visions, forget his worries and fears, just focus on the heartbeats. So here we have limited perspective in Dalinar, so it's third because it says Dalinar, it uses the he pronouns. It's clearly not first person, and yet this is pretty close to his perspective because we're inside of his thoughts. Use this point of view when you want to showcase one or more characters' voices and thoughts. So if you want to have more than one narrator, you want to be in more than one person's perspective, especially for a longer piece, this is a good option for you. So what are some ways to show point of view to your reader? How do you let the reader know whose point of view you're in, aside from pronoun usage? So pronoun usage will get you first, second, or third, but then how do you know which character you're in? Let's say if you're in limited third. One thing that can show us that is let us know what the character is focused on by pointing the camera in that direction. So earlier I had Trisha really focus on the carpets. That tells us that we're in her perspective versus the child's perspective who is not concerned about the carpet. Voice and tone can be used together here. So things like specific word choice and syntax to really make a section of narration sound like the character. Now, we've talked about dialogue usage and how to do this in dialogue in our previous workshop. And this is the same concept, except in the narration versus in the words that they speak out loud. So do they use flowery metaphors or crude innuendos, complete sentences or clipped fragments? And then tone is similar. Voice is what they sound like. Tone is their attitude toward the subject or their attitude toward what's going on. So earlier, Trisha had a somewhat sarcastic or maybe darkly humorous attitude toward the subject at hand. And then the third thing is knowledge, meaning how much knowledge does that character have of what's going on? So what information do they know, but also what do they not know? Because that can be very telling. That can be an element of characterization, as we looked at in our first workshop. So we're going to look at these some more throughout the course of our time together here. And then finally, what purposes does point of view serve in your story? So point of view can serve to characterize, as we looked at in our first workshop, so developing the characters into real, believable, unique individuals. It can also help establish setting. So what do the people in this place tend to think about? What are their major concerns? How does the place affect their motivations? And also just literally you can work in some of that world building to the point of view itself. And then conflict. Internal conflict can easily be driven by point of view because, again, we kind of are getting a window into what is this person focusing on and what are their concerns. Things to keep in mind, in a longer piece, you might switch between multiple points of view. Each one is a window into that particular character. Point of view can be used to characterize regardless of whether you are writing in first person, third person, etc. Okay, it's very easy to do in third person limited, but it can be done in any of them. If you choose objective or omniscient point of view for your story, the perspective may not be an effective tool to characterize, but that is okay. Each point of view has its pros and cons. So as we talked about earlier, objective perspective has that little intrigue of having the audience put more effort into figuring stuff out. And omniscient allows some dramatic irony and allows a broader scope and cast of characters that are active at the same time. So just some things to think about. All right, let's do our quick check to apply some of these things. So I want you to look back at either your quick write from earlier or a page of a current story that you're writing if you prefer. And I want you to look and figure out what point of view is it written in. So first of all, figure out, is it first, second, or third? Is it I, you, or they? And then if it's third, is it limited? And if so, to what character? Is it omniscient or is it objective? And then secondly, what advantages does that point of view give you for this particular story or this particular scene? How might those advantages change if you switched the point of view? So if it's currently in first, how would the story change if you hypothetically switched it into third? You don't have to actually do that right now, but just think about it. Or if you switched the viewpoint character. So if you're in one character's, let's say, first point of view, what if you switched it to somebody else who's in that same scene? How would their focus change? How would their knowledge change, etc.? So just kind of think about these things. You can jot down your answers if you want for a couple minutes, and then we're going to look at some mentor texts together. All right, let's take a look at some mentor texts that are using point of view in creative and effective ways. Our first example comes from Flashes of War by Katie Schultz, and this is a collection of flash fiction stories, and the one we're going to look at is an excerpt from Just the Dog and Me. And the narrator character is named Patrick, and he's a war veteran who has returned home and is taking his dog outside at night. So that's the setup that you need for this section. So I'm going to read it, and then what we're going to look at together is what point of view is this, first, second, or third? Which tools of point of view are being used? So do we have a character focus that's coming through? Do we have a strong voice, etc.? And what are the purposes? So are we getting some characterization? Are we getting a sense of the setting or the conflict, etc.? We're going to do the first one together, and then I'll give you a chance to guess at the next ones. We're going to do 4 altogether. He's all tail and nose, tugging the leash this way and that, sending muted snorts into the night, a canine Morse code. Any minute now, the neighbor's beagle will probably hear us, set the whole block singing. Cooper freezes for a moment, the leash tight between us. Then before I know it, he's sending up more dirt than a landmine, and I just drop the leash and let him dig. It's a beautiful thing, going after what you want like that. Some nights I see shooting stars by the dozen out here. They streak across the sky like tracer fire, faster than you can say, incoming. Tonight, though, the moon's a smile, and when Cooper lifts his muzzle from the hole to see if I'm still here, watching his back, I can barely make out his shape through the dark. So let's take a look at this one together. So this is first person perspective, and the way that we know that is that Patrick uses the pronoun I multiple times throughout this section. And just as a notice here at the beginning, you may find some things in these examples that I have not, but I've just lit up a couple of things to think about here. So we do get the character's focus that's coming through. He's focused on his dog, and it's a rather affectionate relationship that they have here. And he's also focused on this idea of going after what you want, and that's kind of a theme in this particular story. But the thing that comes through the strongest is the voice and the tone. So we have several word choices here that show a lot about this character's background. So he says things like a canine Morse code, more dirt than a landmine, and compares shooting stars to tracer fire. All of these obviously are images from battle. These are things that only he would know or that are unique to his experience. And so they add a lot to the voice of this character that makes this perspective very clearly Patrick's versus, say, his girlfriend who shows up later in the story. Now, as far as the purpose of what's going on here, this is mostly characterization, but it also gets at some conflict because of the consequences of having gone through battle and the way that that still lives with Patrick, even now that he's home. Our second example comes from The Golem and the Genie, and you may remember that we looked at an excerpt from this in the dialogue workshop, if you were with us for that. We're going to look at the other main perspective that's in this story, which is the Golem's. So in the following excerpt, the Golem, a woman made of clay, is arriving by boat in New York City in 1899. She has just awoken for the first time, but her master, Rotfeld, died on the ship crossing over, so she is by herself. The deck was crowded with people, and at first, the Golem didn't see what they were waving at. But then there she was, a gray-green woman standing in the middle of the water, holding a tablet and bearing aloft a torch. Her gaze was unblinking, and she stood so still. Was it another Golem? Then the distance became clear, and she realized how far away the woman was and how gigantic. Not alive then, but the blank, smooth eyes nevertheless held a hint of understanding. And those on deck were waving and shouting at her with jubilation, crying even as they smiled. This too, the Golem thought, was a constructed woman. Whatever she meant to the others, she was loved and respected for it. For the first time since Rotfeld's death, The golem felt something like hope. So what I'd like you to do is what we just did on Flashes of War and figure out what's the point of view, first, second, or third, and if it's third, try to figure out which type. Which tools of point of view are being used? Do we have focus? Do we have voice and tone? And do we have specific character knowledge being revealed that makes it clear we're in that character's mind? And then what's the purpose? Character, setting, or conflict? And I'll just give you a second here to analyze and see what you can find. Okay, it's all right if you're not done analyzing, but let's take a look at a few things that I found. And again, you may have found some additional things. So we have several pieces of character knowledge coming through in this section that identify this perspective clearly as the golems versus a native to New York. So the focus here is on the constructed woman, which is the Statue of Liberty, but the golem does not recognize that statue because she's never been here. This is in fact the first statue she's ever even seen. And so her description, a gray-green woman standing in the middle of the water, tells us, okay, this is something new to this person. And she also doesn't know the significance, whatever she meant to the others. So this tells us that the golem is unaware of both physical surroundings, but also the cultural significance of her surroundings, and that's going to become an important theme in this story. Her focus is on how that statue is or is not similar to herself. So she focuses on this idea of being a constructed woman, which is what she is. She was built of clay, and only a golem would focus on that aspect of, is that statue similar to someone made of clay? So it's a very specific focus that makes it clear that we are looking through her eyes and not anyone else's here. And this is also, this is third limited, and it's pretty close third limited. And we know that because we have she and her pronouns going on here, and they call her the golem. But we are right inside of her thoughts as she logics her way through what to make of this statue. Our next example comes from The Only Harmless Great Thing by Brooke Bolander. And this example is maybe a little bit harder to figure out. This is in the perspective of Reagan, and Reagan is a radium girl who has radiation poisoning from painting watches with radioactive paint, so that's the historical aspect of this text. And her employer did not protect her from this, so they knew, but they did nothing. This is our first introduction to Reagan's character in this book. In this mean old dead dog world, you do what you gotta do to put food on the table, even when you're damn certain deep down in your knowing marrow that it's wrong and that God Almighty, his own damn self, will read you the riot act on Judgment Day. When you got 2 kid sisters and an ailing mama back in the mountains waiting on the next paycheck, you swallow your right and you swallow your wrong, and you swallow what turns out to be several lethal doses of glowing green graveyard seed, and you keep on shoveling shit with a smile, newly missing several teeth, until either the settlement check quietly arrives or you drop, whichever walks down the cut first. Reagan is determined to hang on until she knows her family is taken care of, and when Reagan gets determined about something, look the hell out and tie down anything loose. All right, I'm going to give you a moment to analyze this, look for which point of view do you think it is, first, second, or third, and look carefully. and what tools of point of view are being used, and also what purposes are those serving. All right, let's look at some of these together. So I found that her focus is very much on providing for her family. So her sisters, her mom, and we get this line about the settlement check that she has to live long enough to make sure that that arrives. That's her kind of singular focus here. We know we're in Regan's perspective because of that. And then we also get a ton of really strong voice and tone coming through in this section of narration. Now, the reason I said that it was a little tricky is because when it first starts out in the beginning, it sounds like it might be first person, but by the time we get down toward the bottom and it says Regan is determined to hang on, it's actually third person. It's just one of the closest third person narrations that I've ever seen. So it's so close, it's almost just her speaking directly. So some of the voice pieces that come through are Old Dead Dog, Knowing Morrow, Riot Act. I love this glowing green graveyard seed. We get some alliteration in there too. And look the hell out and tie down anything loose. That's a very unique phrase. And anytime we hit a chunk of narration in the story that has this kind of confidence and this kind of voice to it, we're going to recognize it as Regan's. One of my favorite authors often says that you should be able to open to any section of narration. If you're doing limited third and you have more than one perspective in the story, like this book does, you should be able to open to any page and just read a chunk, and you should know immediately which perspective that is, which character's perspective that you're in, because it should be unique. It should stand out. And in this book, it does very much. One of the perspectives in this book is actually a sentient elephant. So they're very, very different from each other. As far as what purpose this is serving, it's doing a whole lot here. We get the characterization, obviously, of Regan and her situation, but this is also the introduction of the main conflict in the book, which is the impact that this radiation has on several of the characters. All right, our final example here comes from Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi, and this is a very powerful text. And the narrator of this story is an Obanji, or an Igbo spirit, who has possessed a girl named Ada. And Ada's not aware of that at this point in time, but we're going to be in the perspective of the spirit. So in this setting, the girl is at a masquerade dance, and her Obanje recognizes the presence of other spirits. "Have you forgotten us already?" We fluttered. The voice was familiar, layered and many, metal tearing through the air. The ground pounded. "We have not forgotten any of your promises, Noane Anyi." The air cracked as we remembered. It was the sound of our brother-sisters, the other children of our mother, the ones who had not come across with us. Ndi Otu, Obanji. Their earthly masks whirled through the humans, and they smelled like the gates, like sour chalk. Masquerade ceremonies invite spirits, giving them bodies and faces, and so they were here, recognizing us in the midst of their games. All right, see what you can find. Okay, now here's what I found, but again, I think you could interpret this many different ways here. So this is a first person narrator, but it's first person plural, so it uses we and us. And the reason for that is it's the spirit has kind of a connection to all the other spirits, so they are a plural being. And then the thing that comes through the most here is the knowledge that the spirit has of not just the other spirits, but how the gates to the spirit world work, how a masquerade accesses those worlds and serves as a bridge between them. So only the spirit would know this. We would not have human characters here who would have this sort of dialogue between spirits. So it's very specific to this particular narrator. And I lit up this line, it was the sound of our brothers, sisters, as a voice, because that word brother, sisters is one of the unique terms that this narrator uses, that we get when we're in this perspective of the spirit. But really, this whole passage could probably be marked as voice because there are so many specific usages and so many powerful ways that the spirit is discussing things. And again, for purpose, we have everything going on here. So we get characterization not just of the Obanje, but of all the other spirits that are there, that are present. We get some setting of these gates and how they work. And then we also get the conflict of the Obanje sort of becoming self-aware and awakening inside of Ada, which is going to cause all kinds of problems for her as the story unfolds. So lots of ways that you can employ this, and you can use point of view to really make your narration sing. We've reached the part in the workshop where you get to write for an extended period of time and apply some of the skills that we've been talking about. You can either choose one of the prompts that will be on the screen, or if you have a current work in progress that you would like to revise and work with, you're welcome to do that also. Enjoy. We are now at writing time. So we're going to apply some techniques by responding to a prompt. So in this prompt, you have two options. We're going to be writing for 20 minutes, and I'll put a timer up on the screen for you. Option one is to write a new piece of literature using one of these prompts. So the directions are: write the same scene from two different character perspectives. Choose a scenario. A librarian discovers two patrons are leaving love notes to each other in books. A rat shows up on stage at the school play. Or a technician must tell their boss that the office printer is alive and has gone on strike. So you would choose one of those scenarios and then choose two characters. So if you choose the school play option, you might choose one of the student participants and say a parent in the audience. Or if you wanted to get really creative, you could do the rat. It's completely up to you. If you would prefer to work on a scene from a work in progress, then do the exact same thing, but you're going to rewrite a scene that already exists from a different character's perspective. Or if your original manuscript is written in, let's say, objective, so it really isn't from a character's perspective, then try to rewrite it in a different point of view altogether. So maybe switch it to first person if it's in third person objective. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see the toolbox of all the different terms and concepts that we've talked about today. So we have the types of point of view at the top. We have ways to show point of view. So these are things that you can leverage in a section to make it clear which type of point of view we have. And again, not all of them are going to apply to every point of view that you might choose, but they're there as options. And there are also other ways. This is not by any means an exhaustive list. And then at the bottom, we have some of the purposes of point of view. Again, not exhaustive, but character setting and conflict are kind of some of the pillars of story, and you can use point of view to accomplish any or all three of those. So as always in these workshops, if you would prefer to move away from your laptop and come back at the end of 20 minutes, you are free to do so, and then we'll just wrap up with some analysis questions. So enjoy your writing time. You have about 1 minute of writing time remaining. All right, let's come back together and do some analysis and application work. So look back at what you wrote. You should have the same scene written from two different perspectives. So ask yourself, how do these two scenes differ? It's the same event that's happening, but we're seeing it sort of from two different people's perspectives. So look at the character's focus. What are they concerned about in that moment? What is unique about their voice? So this could be their word choice, their syntax, and then their attitude or their tone toward the topic. And what do they know that the other characters might not know that makes it clear that we're in their point of view? Did you choose first person, third person limited? And especially, why did you choose that particular one? What made you gravitate toward that for this particular purpose? How would the scene change if you switched that up? So you don't have to actually do that right now, but just think about what would be different if you were in, I don't know, second person versus third or whatever. What types of point of view would you like to experiment with more in your writings in the future? So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes just to jot down your answers to these questions. And if you're in a setting that allows you to share with other writers, go ahead and do so. Hopefully, the chance to spend an extended amount of time writing and really working with these skills has allowed you to take away some insights about how you might use point of view in your writing going forward. I'm going to just review some of the main things that we talked about today. There are many different points of view you can experiment with in your own writing, each with its own set of advantages and limitations. So we looked at some of the advantages in the craft talk, but also keep in mind that each point of view has its own limitations. So for example, first person point of view has the limitation of not being able to see through anyone else's eyes. And it's also very difficult if you wanted to switch perspectives to switch out of that first person. Whereas second person perspective only has one pronoun, you, and it can get very repetitive if it's used over a long period of time. Ways to show point of view include focus, voice and tone, and character knowledge. So again, these are just some of the ways to really make point of view stand out or make it meaningful and targeted to do what it is that you want to do. And some of those purposes might be characterization, establishing setting, which is a form of world building, which we talked about in the last workshop, and then establishing conflict, so that tension or that rub between different elements in the story that makes it interesting to watch it unfold. Choosing a point of view for a piece is one of the larger decisions that you can make as a writer. You want to think about it. It shouldn't just be random, but at the same time, sometimes it's best to just do what's natural and what feels right for that story. And you can always come back and change it later. However, I will tell you from experience that the longer the story is, the more difficult it is to go back and switch the entire point of view. So once you're a little ways into it, you want to start evaluating, is this the right point of view for me to be in? Or sometimes you'll know upfront for sure which one that you would like to do. Some other takeaways we can look at here are that stories can contain just one point of view, or they can switch viewpoints, although you want to be careful about this and be consistent and not confuse the reader. Now, what I mean by that is if you're going to have an omniscient narrator, then that omniscience should be spread throughout the story, typically. It shouldn't just occur once in a while. If you're mostly in one character's perspective and then occasionally you slip out of it, that's going to be disorienting, and it's going to look more like an error than an intentional usage. Again, there are exceptions to every rule, but typically you want to be consistent. So if you are using third person limited, make sure you're only switching at scene breaks or at chapter breaks. And as always, there is no one right way to use these techniques. Add them to your toolbox and use them when they are helpful to your unique story goals. Thank you for joining us for this workshop on crafting fiction. Be sure to view the other workshops in this series, which you'll see on the screen in a moment during the credits. The Community Writing Center offers a number of other writing workshops, as well as free consultations on any piece of writing. To learn more, please visit our website at communitywritingcenter.com. Thank you.